Welcome to the Matt Phillips Podcast. I am Matt Phillips, your sales leadership coach, mental toughness expert, and founder of Matt Phillips Coaching. We help sales managers and leaders make more money, save time, and become kick-ass leaders of their sales teams. And that's what we're here to talk about on this podcast. We are here to give you the tools and tactics to build a well-oiled sales machine and teach you the mental toughness skills so you can show up confident, focused, emotionally in control, and ready to energize your team. It's time to talk sales leadership and mental toughness. Let's get into today's episode. Welcome, everyone, to the Matt Phillips Podcast. It's Matt Phillips. Excited to be back with you today. I have another very special guest that I'm so excited to dive into. Everything communication, everything curiosity about change. And it was interesting how the kind of universe conspires, if you will. A kind of mutual connection sent an email to connect us just a few weeks ago. In our first conversation, as you're going to find out, I joked with Michael that we should have recorded that conversation because it was the podcast like right then and there. But nonetheless, we had our scheduled time, and here we are to dive into everything communication. So let me tell you a little bit about my guest, Michael Ashford. Michael is the director of marketing at the Receptionist in Denver, Colorado, as well as a communications and speaker coach. You want to talk TedX? This guy will help get you prepared. Prior to his career in marketing, Michael was an award-winning journalist after graduating from Kansas State University. He hosts the Follow-Up Question podcast and the Fabric podcast, and his work has been featured by the Podcast Movement and Men's Health magazines. Michael's approach to his work focuses on the power of storytelling. I've recorded a podcast on storytelling before, but teaching what it means to communicate well and humanizing brands and leaders. So as a sales leader, if you want to learn to communicate better with your clients, with your internal team, with all of your colleagues, Michael is the one to guide us. Without further ado, Michael, welcome to the show.
So glad to be here, Matt. And we're going to do our best to recreate the magic of that first phone call. All right.
It's those moments in life where you're like, I should have hit record, darn it. But nonetheless, here we are. And, where I really want to start a conversation, I remember as soon as you said the word communication, my first comment was, oh my gosh, I can't tell you how many times that I'm out with clients or I'm, out with listen to speakers or anything like that, but I hear all those ums and ahs and awkward pauses and fillers and all that sort of stuff. And then that kind of launched us in this whole thing about these three words, communication, curiosity, and change. Yeah. But before we dive in too much into that, I want to take a step back for a minute. How did you get into the communications game, the speaker coach game? Mike, what has your path been, if you could share a little bit with the audience?
Well, one of my goals, one of my bucket list items for many years was to do a TedX talk. And after my podcast, The Follow-Up Question, back in the summer of 2020, as I got deeper into that show and as I was having the conversations that I was having with just incredible people with amazing perspectives, I started to think, I've got something here. Like I've uncovered some things here, how we interact as people and how we communicate as people through conflict in particular. I think the world needs to hear. And from there, I was like, I think I'm ready for a TEDx talk. So I did some looking around. I applied to a few different places, and as fate would have it, I got an opportunity to give a TEDx talk at the first ever TEDx Manitou Springs event, which, for the people who don't know, Manitou Springs is a incredible mountain town right outside Colorado Springs. And after that talk, they invited me back for a second one. And in between then, always a good feeling. Between then, they started asking me if I would help coach other folks. And to kind of wrap it up succinctly, that actually proved to be more able for me than actually giving. Look, I love being on stage as much as any other communicator and leader, but
yes, sure.
The act of being behind the scenes and helping somebody else communicate their story, their perspective, their experiences in a way that not just motivates or inspires people, but like guides them to an action. That sank its hooks into me. And I just said, you know what? I'm a former journalist. I'm getting my master's right now in mass communications. This is something that I want to help other folks with. And there's a final point here, Matt, and then I'll shut up. There's a difference between communicating when you're stepping on stage and communicating when you're, in a one-on-one with an employee, or communicating in an all hands meeting. There's a different way that we communicate across those things. Communicating on stage, you often were taught the basics of that in school, taught how to come up with an idea and find confirmation of that idea and know how to exert our ideas on others. But there's a whole other side of communication, the listening, the extraction, the understanding how people change, that we weren't quite taught so well how to do growing up and in school. So across the board, there's different approaches to communication. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I just love it, man. There's in that way.
Well, and this is why you and I hit it off, right? Because, I speak on stages. Yeah. I also do a ton of one-on-one coaching in workshops, trying to deliver in an online program. It's a different level of connection through a screen, right? A video than standing in front of someone. The energy is different. And so over the years, I don't know, I've had to become more aware and pay attention and study and train on the communication side of things, because it's just part of what I do, what drives the business.
Right.
So I think this is why this is so important. I always boil it down to we're here to influence people. And I think influence sometimes gets a bad rap of influence for some negative way. I'm like, no, influence can be extremely positive. We're influenced all the time to, buy certain things or hang out with people or, have different connection points, all these sorts of things. So it's not manipulation, it's influence, right?
Well, more often than not, Matt, that's all we have. We often try to bring about change, or we try to communicate our point of view from a position of authority. And I know a lot of leaders who do have authority listen to this show. I myself am a marketing executive, and I have a level of authority in that role. But for many, many instances where we are trying to communicate an idea, trying to evoke an action or inspire an action, all we have is influence.
Very true. Very true. Well, and I want to dive into this because I think it's important to your point, when you're on a stage versus I'm in a one-on-one versus I'm in an all hands meeting, how do we integrate curiosity listening as part of these? So when you look at I'm on a stage versus I'm in a one-on-one, what are some key components that, we should be aware of to make sure we're either saying or listening for or sitting, standing, whatever we need to do? What are some key things that you look for when you're coaching different individuals?
The biggest difference between, I would say, being on a stage and being in front of employees as a leader, the biggest difference there is your mindset going in and how you're going to deliver that content or how you're going to deliver your perspective. When you're on a stage, most of the time, you're there to deliver your ideas, some big thought that you have that you think can help other people, the people in the room. And so you want to invite people into a story. You want to invite people into an anecdote, an example of perhaps a time that you've got it right, you've got it wrong. But more than that, you want to invite people into a story that everyone else in that audience, or the majority of other people in that audience, can see themselves in as well. And if you just stand up on stage and say, I did this and I did this and look at how great I am, you may get some people who are inspired by your greatness.
Yes.
It's rare that is an actionable way to communicate to people, because that very quickly becomes, okay, well, he's great and I'm not. This is perhaps what people would think. He's great, I'm not. She's great, I'm not. So why should I even try? It's cool to hear their story. So if you can get more into storytelling, stories of other people who have perhaps followed a similar path or seen similar results, that tends to be the kind of communication that can inspire people to change, to elicit some sort of action out of them, because they can see themselves in that role. On the flip side,
see, that's a key. Hold on one second, Michael, because I think that's such a key point. When I've heard certain people talk and I'm like, wow, that's amazing. yeah, that's not even relatable to me.
Yeah.
Like, not even close, right? And nothing wrong with their story or their journey or the path they've been on. That's amazing. I think that ability to kind of transition and make it relatable is such. Do you think that's a skill set that can be taught? Because like oftentimes when I'm telling my story, it's like, oh, this happened, this happened, this happened. But I'm always trying to think of myself of like, okay, how do I come up with examples that they're going to resonate with, that are like, I don't know, they correlate.
Yeah.
They're not the same, but they correlate where they think like, oh, wow, yes, I had a similar situation, not like that, but I relate to that. Like, how is that a skill that can be taught? Is that just kind of thinking through those scenarios, or how do you kind of get it to that level?
I think it can be taught. One of the things that often happens at the TEDx events that we just had one, TEDx Manitou Springs back on, I believe, May 13th. And several people came up to me afterwards, after the 3 speakers were done, and they said, I love TEDx. I love the talks. I watch TED Talks all the time. I want to do that, but I don't think I don't think I could. I don't think anybody wants to hear from me. And then I start asking people questions like, okay, well, what kinds of talks inspire you? Why even think about doing a TEDx talk if that's not something you think you could do? I start digging into that person's story. And Matt, one of the things that, going back to my journalism days, that I've always said, everyone has a story to tell. Everyone has a story to tell. Now, are you such that, and here's the part that I think can be taught, are you such that you can explore your story, your own personal experience? Can you go explore that and see if there's other things that relate to it? Can you do the work of research? Because one thing about a TEDx talk, TED often wants head over heart. It's not that, and that is to say, it can't just be some motivating, inspiring talk. It's got to have some backing to it in terms of science or evidence or statistics. There's got to be something that grounds it in reality, like quantifiable reality. But if you, as the speaker, can go and take your idea, your small nugget of an idea, and expand that out and go see, is there something that resonates here? Is there a similar idea that can back me up here? Or is there something that I can address that it runs counter to my idea? Because that can often be a really interesting talk as well. Here's my experience, and here's why everyone else is different. But I do think it can be taught. I do think it can be taught. It just takes a curious mindset to open up and look beyond your own horizon.
Love that. Because it's 2 important things I want everyone to hear. First of all, everyone has a story.
Yeah.
And if you're sitting there thinking you don't have a story, you 100% do. Like, I agree wholeheartedly with that comment. Like, everyone has a story. And it's beyond impactful. I mean, I remember when I wrote my first book, Michael, I was going through that imposter syndrome, right? Of one of those things of like, well, who's going to want to, listen to my story, and who am I to write a book and do all this stuff? And, I co-authored it with this 4-time Olympian. He's like, yeah, your story needs to be told, right? But from my perspective, I'm like, yeah, well, I don't know, but I'm just a guy doing a thing, trying to make a difference.
Right.
And then when you put yourself out there and realize like, wow, like I can resonate with my story does resonate with some people. And yeah, it's never the same, but they can take something from it. It's unbelievably powerful. And I think I'm so thankful for Ruben for pushing me to put the story out there. I think that's why surrounding yourself with good people is very helpful to continue pushing when you don't want to.
Was that Ruben Gonzalez?
Such a key point. Yes.
He was one of the TED talkers in the first TEDx talk that I gave. He was also a TEDx talk. I know Ruben.
That's hilarious. It's a small world. I'm telling you. Yeah. So for those of you watching the video, you can actually see this, but we published. Oh, here it is. This book up here. So we published the book Discovery: How to Become a Champion of Business and Life.
Yep.
Ruben at the bottom there, and it's been translated into Polish.
Oh, I mean, wow.
Because that's a logical language for translating books into, right off the bat. Yeah, skip Spanish. Let's go to Polish first.
Man, what a small world. Yeah, I know Ruben. He and I were TEDx talkers at the first one. He gave great talk. It has over 1 million views. It's all
Mm,
about following the leader.
yes.
Wonderful talk. Great dude.
Yes.
Great dude.
Well, and I think that, with Ruben and things like that, going back to the other point, right? We all have a story, first of all. To your second point, it can be taught about how do we make it real?
Yeah.
Right? Your story's real, but how do we make it real? And what are your thoughts around this? Because when I hear like making it real, like backed in evidence or things like that, like you said, I always go back to like you're trying to reach out to different people who have different learning styles, who are more evidence based. Because some people, like, they hear a story and they're like, "Oh my gosh, I'm fired up! I'll run through a wall," and all they heard was the story. Other people are sitting there like, "Well, but wait a minute, like give me more. Like I need evidence this works, or I need some statistic or something like that." In your mind, is that reaching out to different people based on their learning styles and or different ways to influence people? How do you see that?
Could be. Could be. I would step back and ask the question of the speaker, what's your goal? Like what's your
Mm,
goal in giving that talk, stepping on that stage? Is it to sell a course? Is it to sell your services and your coaching? Is it to inspire that one person? I hear that from a lot of speakers. I just want one person to like get what I'm trying to say and go change their life. And it could be in a
mm,
crowd of 500. Like, okay, that's great. If that's kind of your goal, then who is that person? Who is that person? What's
mm,
their, I don't want to say caricature, but what's the makeup of who that
yes.
person is? Like, let's create that persona, to use a marketing
Mm,
term,
yes.
and let's figure out what that person is going to want to know, understand, see, what's going to resonate with them. And so when you go up on that stage and give that talk, you're speaking to that one person. Now, it could be a room full
Mm,
of that one person,
yes. Yes.
ideally. But if we take a step back and we understand our goal, if my goal as a speaker is not to just inspire that one person, but we want to gain as many speaking opportunities out of that speaking opportunity as possible, we may approach things differently. If we want to
Mm,
sell a course or if we want people to sign up for our coaching, we may take things in a little bit different direction with the content that we deliver. It can all be similar content, just delivered in a different way with different stories, different evidence, different backing behind that. So, yeah, what's your goal for being up in front of people?
well, and that's to your point, speaking in front of a group. I think that's an all hands meeting. That's a one-on-one coaching opportunity.
Yes, it
That's
is.
the salesperson sitting in front of a client. It's take a step back first. What's the
Yeah.
goal? And then we'll back into what we need to talk about.
And all of that, I would say, in some way, shape, or form, I often say, like, what's the change you want to elicit? Because honestly, that's
Mhm.
most of the time what we're stepping on stage to do is elicit some sort of change. Or if we're in front of a customer or a potential customer,
Mhm.
we want to elicit some sort of change out of them. If we're having a one on one with an employee, maybe it's even an underperforming employee,
Mm.
there's definitely some change that we need to elicit there. I would say the biggest difference between being on that stage where we're trying to communicate our ideas out and the more intimate, all hands meetings or one-on-ones with an employee or a customer, there's a big difference there in that you more often want to follow your curiosity. It's hard to follow
Mm.
your curiosity when you're on a stage and you've been asked to share your thoughts and ideas. There's not a whole lot of
Yes.
interaction happening there with the audience, maybe in some situations, but there's a
Mm.
switch that needs to be flipped where the focus and the spotlight is less on you as the speaker when you're in front of an underperforming employee, for instance, and more on
Mm.
them and extracting information out of them, leaning into your curiosity to understand how effective change can be brought about.
So true. When I even think what you're saying applies to everything, right? So if you're and people have this fear of what was isn't public speaking the
Yeah.
I don't know number 2 or 3 fear in the world. I can't
Yeah.
remember the exact stat.
Yeah.
I should have that right of influencing people, but it's greater than spiders or something like that. And when I look at speaking, I think it's that I made this shift one time. I remember it was like 5 years ago, a substantial shift in my business where, and this may sound so simple to everyone and simple to you, but I was preparing to go on stage, and it was like 250 people. So not a huge crowd, right? But 250 people, some people are like, oh my gosh, like I can't, that's so many people. I was so fortunate to have that opportunity. But I had this thought. I was walking around my house, just out here prepping, and I do my speech. I visualize it. I, go over again and again. And this thought popped in my head. And the thought was this: it was what I'm about to do. And I think this applies not only speaking, but just like anything in general. What I'm about to do literally has nothing to do with me.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing. Not one thing that is going to happen has anything to do with me. It's all about that person sitting there. And so your point about, it's like, who am I picturing in my head? Who am I trying to help? And that's in every scenario. Like, we go into customers not to make a sale. At least I don't believe that, right? I go into customers to see if I could help them. And if what I do can help, yes, let's do something cool, right? And we'll figure out budget and work through all the legal stuff. But it's about them. How do I help them? And that took all the pressure off every interaction I had at that point, because I could now walk on a stage, and I hope this doesn't happen, but my zipper's down, or, I forgot a button, or to button a button or something like that. My hair's out of place. It doesn't really matter if I'm focused on who am I trying to reach and who am I trying to help. Underperforming employee, highly performing employee, it doesn't matter. That was a significant shift for me. But it goes back to curiosity. Am I curious to learn about that person and how to talk to them, influence them, help them? I think that's a game changer.
My second TEDx talk, and through the power of editing, you would never know this, but my mind went blank about 3-4 minutes in. I could not think of what I had prepared. I mean, and I had done my talk 250, 300 times.
Right.
And it's one of those things where you can put so much pressure on yourself and be like, you know what, I screwed this up. I can't do this anymore. Or you can say, you know what, the message is important enough. A little mess up, give me some grace, ask for some grace from the audience, say, hey, I need to go check my notes real quick. And that's what I did. I stepped backstage, checked my notes, refound that line that I could not pull out of my head. Because to your point, Matt, it was more about, look, the content here is what is most important, because I believe that it will help people. I believe that what I have to say, no matter the mess up in the middle, is important enough that I'm going to keep going. I'm going to keep pressing into this. Yes. Honestly, I don't have a great answer for people who are scared of public speaking, but I think you're on the right track. I think you're on the right track, and that you've got to find a way to shift the focus away from yourself and more on that outcome that you're hoping to lead people to help people to. And I think curiosity is the starting point of that.
Yes. Well, so let's stay on this, because, when we're talking, there's a lot of sales people, sales leaders, other leaders from different functions who listen to this podcast, right? And so we're trying to figure out, how do we make that difference, and how do we, get more sales, or how do we motivate our team members? Like, we hear all these buzz phrases thrown around, like, how do I motivate my employees? And I've got some people performing well, and it's the bell curve, right? I've got most of my people in the middle, and some, bottom 10% and then top 10%. And when you talk about curiosity, specific maybe to sales, let's talk sales for a little bit. How does that start coming across to make sure that, like, we as salespeople or sales leaders are staying in that right place of, like, asking the right questions, or just having that mindset in everything that we do?
I think you hit it right on the head there. It's asking questions. And I often have an allergic reaction to the phrase active listening because it feels performative to me, the way that it's often described. And I had Oscar Trimboli on my podcast, who wrote the book How to Listen. And he agrees with me. Like, it's good in theory. In practice, it sucks, because you're so focused on, to go back to your point, Matt, active listening puts all the focus on the listener. And the focus should be on the person that you're speaking with. Because active listening, the tips that you hear is like, take notes and then recite back to them what you heard, and paraphrase, and make sure your body language is open to them, so that you appear open to and receptive to their language. All of that are steps for the listener. And you forget you're supposed to be listening to someone. And so when you place your focus on the person speaking, it changes the dynamic of what you feel your role is there, how you're going to show up in that conversation. For me, if I think about what true listening feels like, looks like, it is you, Matt, let's say we're sitting in a conversation. I'm trying to sell you on the Receptionist where I work. I'm trying to sell you on our visitor management system. I want to ask you questions to understand you, to understand those areas of pain, to understand those areas where a change would be a beneficial thing for you. And I'm going to ask you questions, not so I can immediately respond and like throw all of my sales collateral and my sales pitch at you. I'm asking to ask you more questions because the chances are you're thinking of a lot more things up in your head that you're not voicing out to me. And I want everything that's in your head out. So, because that informs me, that tells me just how deep this pain point is. This tells me what you're motivated by. Why are you motivated to change, if you are at all? If I think of listening as making the other person feel heard, then my role as the listener is to shut my mouth and ask questions. That's how we elicit change out of people. Because when someone feels heard, you open up trust. And when someone trusts you, I think every salesperson will tell you, I've made deals because they trusted me, not because I had the better product, not because I had the better price, because they trusted me. And you can't get there if you're constantly inserting active listening techniques and making someone feel not heard. Does that make sense?
That's true. Makes total sense because when you actively listen, I'm thinking the whole time like, okay, they said that. How do I paraphrase that back instead of focusing on what they said in the first place? Because by the way, as I was thinking that, I just missed like the key point of the whole listening because I'm not listening. Yeah. I totally get it.
Yeah, it is. How I've heard it described is, I describe it as listen for patterns and anomalies. When you can listen to patterns, you can begin to dig in and understand what this person seriously cares about. We come back to the things that we often care about in patterns, or we can listen for anomalies. We can listen for, they said that they cared about this thing, and they said that the project involved this, but then they threw in that one little thing, just this one-off random, and if my boss said if I didn't get this done, we'd have to shake up the department. But we really want to focus on streamlining and being efficient. Well, can we go back to what your boss said? Why does that matter to you? And I've also heard it say, we so often listen for, especially in conflict, we listen for difference. What happens when we listen for similarity? It's kind of a similar thing there. So, yeah.
Interesting. All right. This is so critical because when we're so many different places, I want to take this. So I'm trying to figure out the best path forward. You and I talked briefly at last week about underperforming employees. And I think this is where it comes up. It's like where we have, when you're talking like this, it's like where these problems, like where are we paying attention to like where things are like different, right? And what really is the true story of what's going on and how do we ask questions to dive into it? Let's talk a little bit as this applies to like underperforming employees, because we're trying to, we put people on PIPs, those performance improvement plans and all this sort of stuff, right? And which I'm not saying they're wrong, but how do we, when we're trying to listen differently, like how do we deal with underperforming employees?
Yeah. It's one of the toughest things that we have to deal with as a manager, the people side of things, right?
Yes.
And especially in the world of sales, it's very quantifiable who is underperforming and who's not.
Yes.
But people's reasons for underperformance are where we as leaders and managers have to get a better understanding of not only ourselves and what we believe, but why someone would slip into underperformance. Now, I know a lot of managers, and previously in my career, I followed the same line of thinking, that underperforming employees were simply lazy, entitled, not up to par, just couldn't hack it. And you do kind of surface level things to try and get them up to speed, but you really, I mean, every sales leader will say this, I think, or every manager, myself included, for many years, we like to spend our time focusing on the high performers. It's fun. It's fun to win deals. It's fun to succeed.
Yes.
That's the fun stuff as a manager. But on the other side, if you can tap in less to your leadership hat and more into your human empathy and see that person as a person, as a human who more than likely, in an ideal scenario, more than likely wants to do a good job. They want to do a good job. If you start asking yourself the question of, okay, if I assume that that person wants to do a good job, what's different? What's holding them back? What could be true in their life that would prevent them from that? So again, we've got to tap into our own curiosity first here. And the last time that I put someone on a PIP, so jumping back here, for many years after I became a marketing leader, and before I became a marketing director, I knew nothing of performance improvement plans. So this was a whole new world for me. But the first time I had an underperforming employee and my boss said, you should probably put them on a performance improvement plan. They're not doing a good job. I set them up to fail. That performance improvement plan was simply a piece of the puzzle to document their failure so that I could make the case to fire them at the end of the 3-week PIP period.
Yes.
Happened.
Agreed. That's in my experience, that's the label of PIP. PIP, you're gone.
You're gone.
Some period of time. And not a long-term play here. Yes.
And usually this is what kills me. Usually the expectations of a PIP are like so far and above just the normal everyday interactions. Like you've got to not just do your job, you've got to exceed your job. So you've got to all of a sudden become a high performer in these 3-week period, or else you're out. Fully admit I've been there. I set people up to fail.
I've done it too.
Set people up to fail. The last time I had an underperforming employee was at the previous company that I worked for, where I was the vice president of sales and marketing. And he was a great employee. So we moved the company headquarters from San Francisco to Denver. And that's when I moved out here to Colorado. And so I had to hire a brand new marketing team. And I hired this particular guy over another candidate who was probably a little bit more experienced, had a little bit more, just had it more, a little bit all more together. But I hired this other guy because I saw potential in him. He was raw. He was eager to learn. And I hired him. And I remember taking him out to Highlands Tap and Burger here in Denver after I hired him. And I said, I want you to know, you've got to come through for me. I'm going out on a limb here. You've got to come through for me. And for the first few months, he was phenomenal. He was great. He was our marketing coordinator. He was in charge of all of our trade shows and conferences and social media and our blog. And then I started to notice that he's starting to miss some deadlines. Okay. Some blogs aren't getting edited on time. Some aren't even getting edited at all, I start to notice. We start missing some shipping deadlines for some of our conferences. And so we've got to pay extra to expedite the shipping. Costs us money.
Yes.
And then I start to notice, instead of getting in at 9, he's getting in at 9:30. Oh, he got in at 10:30 yesterday. And we didn't have a set time to be in, but 10:30 was pushing it.
Right.
So I'm like, I'm trying everything. Like, man, here is your hard deadline for this blog. Send me the shipping information when you ship this out. Like all these things I'm trying to say, like, you've got to get this done. But it just kept deteriorating. And it got to the point where I had to put him on a performance improvement plan. But here's the difference, Matt. Before I did, I sat down and talked with myself. I got curious about myself. And I thought about all the other times that I have put somebody on a PIP. I'm like, I know this guy can do a good job. I hired him because I saw the potential in him. He's done a good job. Something's wrong. Something is off here. What could I be missing? That question, Matt, that question, I don't care if you're a sales leader, if you're, just an everyday random person on the street thinking about, the politics of today, that question, what could I be missing, changes everything. So before, and then I asked myself, I know what I've done with a PIP before. Is that really the type of manager and leader that I want to be, where I set someone up to fail? I said, no.
Yes.
Man, that's not what my definition of good leadership is. So with those two questions, I sat him down and I was like, look, man, you're going to have to go on a performance improvement plan. I've got to do it because of this. I outlined the reasons why. But before I said, before we go any further, I got to ask you, is everything okay? He broke down. Turns out he and his partner of many years had broken up. And he was going home after work every night and working until 2-3 o'clock in the morning, separating out and determining who got what. They were going back to their apartment. They were dividing up their possessions that they had accumulated in, I think it was like 5 years of being together, including their pet.
Ugh.
And when I heard that, I'm like, it all makes sense. Of course, he would be showing up late to work. Of course, his performance would decline. And that doesn't excuse it. But if I'm the type of leader who wants my people to bring their full selves to work, it has to be the bad and the good. There's going to be some crap in there along with the really good stuff.
Yes.
So now I can have a conversation with him about, okay, how do we make this better? You still have to go on a performance improvement plan, but how can we craft it? How can we build it so that you're set up to get out of this? I understand what you're going through. It sucks. You still have a job to do. We've got to get you back there. And so instead of a 3-week, you immediately start hitting these metrics and goals, I could ramp them up. I could have an empathetic approach, Matt, and ramp him up into, let's get a little bit better every day, rather than day one of your performance improvement plan, you've got to be hitting these metrics, full stop, or you're out. He did it.
I love that.
He did it. And he went on to become a phenomenal employee after that. He got through that situation. He improved steadily over the course of a couple months. And he and I just met up about 2-3 months ago. And we joke about it now. He's like, hey, Michael, remember that time you put me on a PIP? I'm like, yeah, I do. You deserved it, man. And he's like, you know what? Yeah, I know. It sucks though. I was like, well, you got through it, man. So it's something that we can joke about too. But man, could you imagine the damage that I would have done to his professional life and possibly his personal life had I set him up to fail in that moment? Had I not leaned into my curiosity about what it is that I believe as a manager? Because that's the thing about change, Matt. Change often cannot happen until we look at ourselves and expect change from ourselves first. Rant over, story done. Hopefully that answers your question.
I think it's brilliant. And I love the question. It's questions.
Yes, it is.
To your point, right? What questions are not only are we asking others, but what are we asking ourselves? Yeah. Right? That's such a powerful question. Like, what am I missing? We did an event. You're making me think of, we're launching this program for high school student athletes, and we just got some coaches together to test the concept because I don't know what I don't know. And I've learned this over time, but I remember both my wife and I started making a list of questions that we needed to ask in that room. And our approach was like, nothing's wrong. It could be a dumb question. There is no dumb question, but just like, what do we need to ask to build this thing for them, not the way Matt Phillips wants to do it? And we asked a similar yet different question. I asked, what question am I not asking that I should be asking? And it changes the game. It gets you thinking, like, it throws you into that curiosity mindset. Where then you're like, well, what about this? What about this? What about this? What about this? And all of a sudden, now you're getting to the core of like really what the issue is or what you're trying to sell, or frankly determine, do they even need what I sell?
Right.
I mean, that's a powerful question.
Right.
Do they even need what I
Yeah.
sell? Because they may buy it, but they're going to dump it in 6 months, right? I mean, that may not be a bad thing, but do they even need what I sell? And it's kind of that balance. I love that story. And so when you were going through that situation with that gentleman on the PIP, did he help you craft like it sounds like a pretty open discussion of, okay, what helped me help you, kind of like, how do we develop this together? Right? That was the question. Like, what are the right steps? Is that how it went?
Yeah. That's pretty spot on. It was, look, for instance, you're missing blog deadlines and you're not editing stuff. So what process can we put in place right now to take the editing off your plate so that for the first couple of weeks, you just have to meet the publishing deadline? So it's not going to be a permanent solution, because eventually I want you back editing those blogs. But for right now, what could you do if we took the editing off your plate? Well, yeah, I can get that done. Absolutely. And it wasn't all just like, you get to decide what your performance improvement plan is. There were absolutely points where I'm like, look, I got to step up and be the manager here and tell you what to do. But it was far more communicative and back and forth because, again, let's go back to change. Like, let's ask that question. Why do people change? And one of my favorite quotes about that is from John C. Maxwell. He's a leadership coach. He's an author. He said, people change when they learn enough that they want to, when they see enough that they're inspired to, when they receive enough that they're able to, and when they hurt enough that they have to. And Matt, I don't want to be the type of leader and manager and person that hurts people to change. That's another way of saying forcing people to change, to go back to what we talked about earlier, that when we have the authority to bring about change, that's how we wield it. We just say, you're going to do this or you're out. That's what a traditional PIP is.
Yes.
But is that real change? If forcing people to change, if hurting people to change is real, is that long-term? Is that sustainable? Will they be fully invested in that change? Probably not. But if we can teach and guide and provide as leaders the space for someone to come to a decision to change on their own, that's change that lasts. That's change that is real. And look, there are some crappy employees out there. Like, you're going to have to fire people. That happens. But can we get to a place where that's a last resort? I don't know. I like to think that it is.
No, that's a great point. Well, we all hear the stories. Let's go back to, like, if I'm on a stage speaking to someone and I'm telling stories about change and how you can overcome it. And this gentleman who was on a PIP and came out of it and was one of the best employees in the world. And then you start saying, let me tell you stories about these other people who did it. So the evidence starts to stack up. Like, there is the possibility there.
You got it.
And it was through this process that you're walking us through that allowed that to occur.
You got it.
And how do we integrate that in other areas? And that's that evidence that, like, it can happen. It is happening every single day. It's just we're not hearing about it. We're not seeing it in front of us every single day. But it does exist, right? Just because you don't have a Lamborghini doesn't mean like a Lamborghini does not exist, right? They exist, or I don't know.
I love where you're going.
Monster. I don't know. I know where I'm going with this, but I think, like, the key thing of what you're saying is, how do we pause for a minute, create the space, create the time to think, to interact with people, to ask questions with their best interest in mind, no matter what change is coming. How do we pause and think? Now, I think that's also within what you're saying, a critical piece too, right? You took a moment to pause and to ask yourself the question, like, what am I missing? Which led you to other questions, which led you to a conversation. And I see a lot of leaders struggle with this, of like creating time. And we all we all get busy and our to-do list grow massive. And we think we got to go. When that pause time is just as important, right? To make sure we're effectively communicating or allowing people to walk in our office. What makes people, in your mind, or what makes you like, what makes you pause?
Oh,
Because it's an interesting discussion point, I
yeah.
believe, because we're taught to grind and go, but it's like, well, hold on a minute, just chill for a bit. It could be 5 seconds, but just think. Well, what makes you different? Is it just the way your mind works, or like?
It's been years in the making to try and get to this point. It is in the pause where we become better leaders, better managers, better people. It is in that pause. And you have asked Matt one of my favorite questions is, how does someone get to that moment of self-reflection and self-awareness that they take a step back and say, do I have the full story here? And that's, I've explored that with so many people on my podcast. I've read so many books about this. The best answer that I can give you, it's built and created through an experience that creates such a cognitive dissonance in your mind that you can't help but ignore it. So in that instance with that employee that I had to put on the PIP, the story that I described, it was so cognitively dissonant in my mind that all of a sudden he was my worst employee when he was one of the best for months. Yes. And I could not marry those two realities in my mind. And instead of leading with my judgment of him and you know, a lot of people have, or perhaps would think in that moment, well, he just pulled the wool over your eyes. Like he was doing well for a few months, just like during that honeymoon period. And then the person that he was showed up 4, 5, 6 months into the job. Mm-hmm. That can happen. That has happened to me in my career with other employees. Absolutely. You get people that do that. But that's the moment where that's the feeling where you're tapping into yourself and you have to give yourself space as a leader to sit and think, like reflect on your day, reflect on the emotions that you're feeling, reflect on who you're leading and why you're leading them, and get to that point where you're like, yeah, something up here in my head doesn't line up. Why? What am I feeling? And this is, I call this, and I'm writing about this in my book, the psychology of conflict communication. That's the process that people go through. They are met with a dissonance of some sort in their life, in their mind, that causes them to first pause and ask questions of themselves. What am I missing? I'm really irritated right now. Am I irritated at the situation, the argument, the emotion that I'm feeling? What's really got me mad right here?
Yes.
Asking questions of yourself, then asking questions about others. You're still stuck in your mind. You're still processing this in your mind, but you're considering a different perspective, a different point of view. Okay, what could be true about them that they would act this way, that they would think this way, that they would behave this way? What am I missing about them? Their experience, their perspective. What do I know to be true about that person that is going against what I'm seeing or noticing? And then finally, using that curiosity to go ask questions of people. Now that you've given yourself the space to think of questions of yourself and of them or about them, you go and ask questions of them. Curious questions that get them talking, that get the thoughts and feelings and emotions out of their head, not so you can respond immediately, so you can ask more questions of them and get the full picture of who they are. The best people, the people that I know who are the best leaders, are the best bridge builders, are the best communicators, follow that process. It may not always be consciously, but they follow it. And it makes all the difference in the world.
You just wrapped us up beautifully. That is so well said, so well articulated. In the conscious decision that all of us as leaders need to make to walk through that process that you just laid out every day. And what you just described, you know where my mind went, Michael?
Tell me.
To my 17-year-old daughter.
Yep.
And my 15-year-old son and my 11-year-old daughter. that same thing applies.
Yes, it does.
Of conversations we have every day. And as a father, in this case, am I willing to follow that same process to help my children? Not to respond, but to help my children. What am I missing? What question am I not asking that I should be asking? If anyone out there is listening right now, and I know you are, please implement that process that Michael just laid out. Just beautiful. Beautiful, beautiful.
You're giving me goosebumps, man, because you're hitting on exactly what the work that I do with my podcast, The Follow-Up Question, is set out to help us do. That's a process that is available to us in every way, shape, and form. And the fact that you are asking those questions, the questions that you just asked, you got it, man.
Well, thank you, because you made me think of those questions. So I appreciate that very much. Now, I can't wait to meet in person one day, because we both happen to be in Colorado.
Absolutely.
And we'll make that happen.
Yes, sir.
To wrap us up today, if people want to connect with you, and we'll have links to all social and website and all that sort of stuff, but what's the best way that people could connect with you, Michael?
The hub of everything that I do is my website, michaelashford.com. You can get links to the podcast there. You can get links to my speaking and coaching. I've got a bunch of articles up there about how to communicate well and what that looks like. And then full-time, like I said, I'm the director of marketing at The Receptionist. So go to thereceptionist.com and check out our podcast there, our show. And that's where you can find me, those two places.
That's awesome. Or on a TedX stage. Somewhere.
Although these days I'm behind stage.
Coaching people on there. I love that. Well, I can't thank you enough for your time. Just truly appreciate and getting to dive into such a critical topic. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Matt. I absolutely love the conversation. And for sure, let's connect here in person soon. Okay.
Definitely. Thanks so much, Michael. All right. Bye-bye. Thank you for joining us today on the Matt Phillips Podcast. If you are like us, we know that you are here to do great things, to become the sales leader that makes things happen and drives big time sales results. We know you have that big vision, and we are here to help get you where you want to go. We're here to help you develop that unstoppable, rock solid leadership skill set and help you train to master the one true differentiator: mental toughness. We would love to be part of your journey. So if you are ready, head over to mattphillipscoaching.com and check out the ways that we can help. As always, please share this episode and make sure you subscribe by clicking the button below. Thank you again. And now, go crush the day.